And now Work Matters with Julie Mann.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show that ponders the big question, does work matter? And if it does, why? Today, we're going to explore the topic of the COVID-19 vaccination kind of process, availability, how it's impacting the workplace. How do you kind of work through all of that as, regardless of where you're at, we're really in kind of those introductory phases as employers on, how do we extend that? What does that look like in the workplace? So couldn't have a more perfect person on the show with us than James Reid. And James is an employment and business attorney and also a partner at Dinsmore Shohl. And so, he's in this issue nonstop from obviously that legal perspective. And so, James, thanks a ton for joining. I can't wait to kind of dive into this topic.
Oh, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah. So let's start with kind of the easy topic. I think there's a lot out there, but I know it's going to take us into a bunch of other things. So there's that. Is it required or recommended space? And my take on everything that I read is that most employers are going more towards that recommended space because there's a lot of dots that have to be, I's that have to be dotted and T's that have to be crossed to go into that required space. But that's just my sense. So where are you at on that?
Recommended is definitely 95% of employers' pathway. The other 5% sometimes require it in high-risk situations, maybe a hospital or some other environment where the customers won't come unless they're comfortable everyone around them has been vaccinated.
Okay. So if we're in that recommended space and then we get into our communications to our employees kind of embrace that recommendation, right? And so is there any messaging pitfalls that you have to be careful of in the workplace relative to that messaging of our recommendation?
Yeah, we can't act as unlicensed doctors and give medical advice and information because we don't have a license to do so. So instead, what I would do is refer employees to resources that are not based on the company opinion, but factually out there under approved organizations, and let them understand the facts and be aware that we can't ask pre-screening questions to our employees because that would be an illegal medical exam under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right. So the education piece is really important. So I can send a note out to employees and say, our stance on this is that it's recommended, and here's an attachment that talks from the CDC or something that talks about vaccination. Is that a safe type of approach?
That is a safe approach, but employers should be aware that if an employee has a sincerely held religious belief, such as being vegan and those vaccinations are tested on animals, or they have a disability that would be complicated by receiving the vaccine and there's a doctor's note, be prepared to have some reasonable accommodations and engage in the interactive process.
Absolutely. So what about... So now that vaccinations is something that, we're talking about, right, as it's becoming more real in the workplace. So, and you want to stay clear of kind of that medical space. How does an employer handle the employee who comes to them and says either I want the vaccine, I don't want the vaccine, I had the vaccine, or I'm scheduled to get the vaccine? Where do employers, what are appropriate responses, if you want to say, if that happens to you in the workplace, how do you navigate around that?
So a lot of companies are being progressive and they want the vaccines to occur. So they're giving incentives, maybe paying $100 or giving them additional PTO days if they have any complications and need time off after receiving the vaccine. I have a lot of clients that typically need 24 to 48 hours off after their second vaccine shot, and make it clear that they can get paid if they need to miss work during the time they need to actually receive the shot.
So my understanding, so help me in that space. So my understanding is that, yes, those are things that we can do. But if we do them, if you go back to the comment that you made about, the medical or the religious accommodations that need to be had, and this is where actually I've seen it a couple of different ways, and I've seen companies incent all employees so that we're not being discriminatory against those who are not interested. I've also seen companies who are just incenting those who take the step to vaccinate. So if I do that second, is there, I guess, how do I navigate if I'm that second company that says I'm going to incent with either dollars or time off just the group that's vaccinating? Is there a discriminatory space in there I've got to be careful of?
Yes, it's similar to attendance bonuses. If somebody has protected reasons why they can't participate, we need to make sure they aren't punished.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of things, the liability would be relatively small. If it's just one employee that has a religious belief, you would just pay the difference of 1 or 2 days of wages. It's not like you have a $100,000 liability.
Okay. That's good to know, because I've seen it. I've seen, as you kind of see companies putting their incentive programs out there. I think what's good to hear from a listening audience standpoint of view is that you can do that, right? You can create that incentive program around this vaccination that either is a PTO or a dollar incentive component, right?
That's right. It's similar to companies that have policies that encourage people to vote and pay for that time as well in states that don't mandate such pay.
So that's great. I think that helps out a lot. So then let's think about that. So we put some program in. So let's go backwards. We talk about the kind of that recommendation space. We put in an incentive program for people to follow. Now, is there any catch in if I put the incentive program, then I know who has been vaccinated and who has not? And I won't get the phrase exactly right, James, but I'm sure you've seen it. But there's also that bias. It's a new form of bias that I've read about, but it's kind of like the vaccination bias, if you want to say, but that's not the right word. So is it okay that we know those things in the workplace?
It is okay that you know these things. It's not considered a medical exam to require an employee to provide proof that they actually received a COVID-19 vaccination. So there's no issue in that regard. I think what you may be referring to is unconscious bias is kind of the new claims going on in 2021. Mm-hmm. And if you are somehow treating employees differently with some stereotype or bias based on whether or not they're getting the vaccine, that is where you could be exposed to a claim. And you want to make sure that the vaccine recommendation is job-related and consistent with a business necessity standard. So, for example, if all your employees can do the job wonderfully remote, I would be less inclined to require them to get the vaccine or even highly recommend it. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. So again, let's maybe step back and take a broader look at COVID-19 vaccination in the workplace. What are other things that as employers that they want to think through as they kind of like move forward and as these vaccinations become more available?
Well, I think they should look at the history. Have they ever required flu shots? And has there been any issues with any of those policies or requirements? And many companies' insurance may offer, free shots or vaccinations. So I would just make it clear that if you're going to offer it on site to try to be more efficient, you don't want to have any employee give those vaccinations or ask any of the pre-screening questions related to those vaccinations, because those pre-screening questions could be a disability-related inquiry, and that's what would get employers in trouble.
Well, and my understanding is that, the best pre-screening question is, are you interested in the vaccine, yes or no? With no space for comments, right?
That would be a safe question to ask.
Yeah, so we're allowed to, and I think that, I've chatted with people that the question has been, can they even ask that question? And I think as you continue to work through the availability of the vaccination, that, a lot of your partners that you're working with to try to get that vaccination available, they want to know what is the tendency from a participation standpoint of view. So they're setting aside or have the appropriate amount of vaccinations. So you can ask the yes and no question, but you want to be careful and, not have a big comments box so that they can say yes and then put a big paragraph about because or no and a big paragraph about their because. Is that right?
That's right. And I'm seeing a lot of anonymous surveys where there's no other question to answer other than yes or no. And about 50% do not want to get the vaccine or be forced to get the vaccine.
Yeah, that's about what I've been reading is that seems to be it's hovering right around that 50% mark. So that's really interesting. So let's go back again to the bigger point of the vaccination, because I think you hit on a key thing, and I've talked about this with other folks as well, is that, vaccination in the workplace or as a workplace benefit, let's call it that, isn't something that's a new concept, right? Because we have been doing these flu vaccines. I mean, most companies have made a flu, they set it up. So either the flu vaccine comes to the workplace or people have the ability to do that. So if you have that practice in place, that's kind of a good place to start as you think about, this form of vaccination, correct?
Exactly. You're not recreating the wheel. You're looking at the history of your company and what other companies have done successfully and following best practices.
And then I want to go back to another topic that you talked about was PTO. So you talked about the person who has a reaction of some form to the vaccination. Talk a little bit more about navigating that.
So many states have paid sick leave requirements, and many handbooks offer paid sick leave, PTO. To incentivize employees not to burn up their PTO or their vacation time, employers are saying if you get this, it's common to have 48 hours of time to recover, so we'll give you an additional 2 days of PTO to create additional incentives to get the vaccine, which basically sways, I've seen through studies, about 15 to 25% more engagement and participation in getting the vaccine.
Interesting. Yep. And are you seeing that the prevalence is that the vaccination process, if you want to say, is coming to the employer, or are employers creating, kind of like that PTO space to be sure that employees can co-engage? And or, now that I'm saying that, does it need to be both? Because, of course, some people's preference could be to go get that vaccination at a place other than the work site, correct?
Yeah, I'm not actually aware of many employers that are doing it at the work site. I think they're scared to have, people in close proximity together. So I'm seeing a lot of it pass to, the local store and pharmacy and just recommending they go to the one of their choice.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a big difference so that PTO approach is probably, are you seeing that more prevalently then?
It's very common if they go during the workday to the pharmacy to get the vaccination. But I think the bigger issue is I'm seeing somewhat of a higher level of need to have a day or two off outside of the time needed for the vaccination to fully recover.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. So COVID-19 in general, right? So maybe we move a little bit away from the vaccine issue. From your perspective, is there a predominant thing that you're really, talking about a lot in your space that's just more COVID-19 related other than the vaccine? Like, what's one of the most prevalent topics that I know you are? So maybe the best question is, what's one of the most prevalent issues that you're seeing out there relative to just COVID altogether from a workplace standpoint of view?
It's really unfortunate. COVID-19 is making more subordinates complain about leaders and managers and executives, and it creates a cultural issue in the workplace where if an executive opens the refrigerator or gets some coffee and doesn't wipe down the station afterwards and they get reported to the CHRO or some other location, it creates this communication and conflict issue in the workplace that's unhealthy. So I think we really need to encourage employees on how to communicate issues through an organized fashion of maybe telling the person you have an issue with what the problem is and trying to fix it at that level. Otherwise, HR professionals are going to receive thousands of small workplace issues to investigate.
And I would completely agree with that. Having that method in place, and you can coach along that lines, because a lot of times, just mentioning it right there at the spot helps. So, James, another fantastic discussion. Man, I really enjoy our chats. So I appreciate you joining us on the show. And for everybody listening, I think there was lots of good nuggets to take away from there. So for everybody listening, let's always be sure, let's transform today. Let's have an impact on tomorrow. And until next time, let's make work matter.